So I welcome all of you to this recording session from the sidelines of Jaipur Dialogues. I have with me Mr. Veeresh Malik. Good morning, Mr. Veeresh Malik. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Let me introduce Mr. Malik. Mr. Malik is a multifaceted personality. He started with the Merchant Navy, then went over to software. From software, he even worked in the NDTV. And right now, he is doing what is called fiduciary forensics.
Fiduciary forensic audits, yes.
Fiduciary forensic audits. And why we have Mr. Veeresh Malik here today is because he is venturing into an area which has become very, very important for us to understand today. And commonly it is called economic jihad, but this is basically economic monopolization by using religious identities. This is how I define this economic jihad. Mr. Malik, you've traveled all over the world, and I suppose you've noticed this up close. You'd have noticed this dimension of economic jihad or economic monopolization, both among the Jews as well as among the Muslims. How does it work in India?
I first spotted economic jihad when I was in the Merchant Navy, and I realized that for about 1,000 years before, it was the Islamic seafarers who took the concept of economic jihad forward by monopolizing the sea trade lanes. We must remember, anybody and everybody who invaded India came in over the mountains or by sea, and except for Genghis Khan, who didn't have a sea, everybody left by sea, carrying whatever they could from India. Alexander the Great, everybody says he stopped at the Indus.
Yes.
He took 5,000 odd ships from down the Indus.
Yes, he went down the Indus.
Persian Gulf, and then over to the rest of the world. So that was the first step in economic jihad, finessed very well by the Islamic seafarers and then taken to fruition by the European colonials who came into India. What is Islamic jihad today? Islamic jihad today is about taking over almost every aspect of trade, from banking to food chain. Luckily, they haven't reached security as yet because they don't really make much by way of weapons. Islamic Jihad was the stated national concept for Iran in 2011. That was more in tune with the look east, look south approach that they were taking when they had sanctions against them.
Right.
The Saudi oil interests then took economic jihad further,
Right.
and concentrated on two things. One was food, of course, food and allied subjects like scrap. The other was shadow banking, or what we call opaque beneficiaries.
Okay.
Economic jihad today consists largely of these two related aspects of trade being totally controlled by people from the oil-rich world. Not necessarily only Islamic, because banking is trans-religion, banking is banking. You could be the Pope, you could be Aga Khan, you could be any formation of banks in the world. That is what is economic jihad.
I guess so, because I think you have read and you probably commented on that famous article by Nicholas Taleb, which says that it is very easy for an intolerant minority to make the majority bow to its whims. And of course, his context was the kosher of the Jews as it is practiced in the America, and that is applicable to almost the entire gamut of economic activities, including things like cosmetics and including things like vegetables, for instance. What is the aspect of this economic jihad which we see the most in the Indian context?
Within the Indian context, but before that, just a moment on Nicholas Taleb. The real resource person on this, in my opinion, is another Nicholas called Nicholas Shaxson, who speaks a lot about the tax havens and the economic aspects of economic jihad, which we'll come to at a few minutes from now, I think.
Yes.
On the food and specifically halal aspect of economic jihad, which impacts day-to-day life in India, and not just the super top banking sector, but everything from meat to vegetables to cosmetics to atta to chawal, every aspect of food chain from farm to fork is sought to be brought under a halal certification, which while not required by FSSAI has found its way into the FSSAI manuals by all sorts of subterfuge.
What is the legal sanctity of these halal certification authorities?
Nothing, absolutely nothing within India. But you look at government tenders, they will ask for halal under certification. You look at airlines, you look at parliament, you look at railway stations, you look at canteens in government offices, you look at this hotel down below the tender, I'm sure it says halal certification required. There is no legal sanctity under any law of India or even rules or bylaws or acts.
So would you
It's
agree?
just become a natural practice.
Would you agree that these halal certification authorities are liable under both under the competition law as well as under the consumer law? Except probably the larger issue of hurting people's religious feelings?
Well, 295A is one option which I am taking up with the help of friends in the legal world. I'm not really competent to comment on the legal aspect. But as far as Competition Commission and consumers forums are considered, see, consumers forum will not work because the person impacted happens to be a commercial entity, not an individual. They don't come to me and say, you have to get a halal certificate. And Competition Commission, I did go across and ask a few friends over there, and they couldn't even understand what I was talking about. So it will take a lot more in terms of the narrative, in terms of explaining to people what this whole halal certification is about. I'm very proud to mention about one aspect that has come after 370. The Jammu and Kashmir Jails Department has issued tenders for meat in halal and chhatka both.
I suppose they must have been suffering very greatly.
Well, they have a few non-halal eaters in jails in Jammu Kashmir who made a noise.
What is the exact revenue dimension of this entire activity? Does it run into a few crores or hundreds of crores or thousands of crores? What is the dimension like?
It's a zakat, it's a tax on the rest of India running to thousands of crores. You could be a small restaurant on the side of the street selling meat, or not even selling meat. You could be somebody selling dosas and idlis, vegetarian stuff, and they would say, oh, we are from a particular religion and we need you to show us the halal certificate. Otherwise, our religious sentiments are getting hurt. So the guy says, pind chhadao, 500 rupees saal ka ek certificate le lo and get along with life. Or if you're a larger restaurant or your airline or something, the certificate costs a lot more. Plus, they end up charging you like in the merchant navy for certification, for surveys, for inspection, for this report, that report every month. It runs into thousands of crores of income for a particular community every year to issue halal certification for everything, farm to fork.
Have you consulted lawyers on this, whether this is some kind of an extortionist practice and whether it can be criminally liable under extortion?
Again, yes, I am in touch with some very good lawyers in Delhi. First of all, it takes a lot of time to explain the context to them because they absolutely refuse to believe that halal is extended to beyond meat. I've tried to explain it to religious bodies also. Luckily, some religious bodies which are very vegetarian have begun to understand what we are talking about. Taking this up to courts, honorable courts, is certainly going to happen, and I've just filed the first police complaint against my own club.
Oh, I see.
It's a club which was made for refugees of Punjabi and Bengali origin of Hindu and Sikh faiths, and that's gone totally halal too. Such is life.
So you're basically funding your own, let me put it in a different way, you're funding violence upon yourself.
I'm not funding violence upon myself because I'm not spending anything. I'm very lucky enough to have very good friends who are lawyers who even pay for my
I think
in terms of time, yes.
I'm not talking about you. In general, the people, by paying for these halal certifications, are providing funds for violence upon themselves.
These funds are most certainly moving into streams which we can't prove, but we certainly do suspect are not exactly in favor of Indians in India and the rest of the
So
world.
I'll
Halal
tell you one
economics,
fact. I will tell you one fact because I happened to interview Mr. Arif Muhammad Khan recently. And he stated one very alarming fact. Of course, his direction to which he was pointing was different, but the fact is still very, very alarming. He says that 99% of these zakat funds are being used to pay Maulvis, that is to build up narratives to pay the madrasa teachers, whereas in Islam it is said that all education has to be free. So you cannot pay these madrasa teachers, and those madrasa teachers are being paid out of these zakat funds. And not only they are being paid out of these zakat funds, there is a huge expansion taking place of madrasas all over by having paid teachers, and paid teachers are not allowed in Islam.
I do believe you are perfectly correct, and in fact, I happen to be involved as there is yet another seafarer called Ajit Vadakail, who said exactly the same thing or close to the same thing a few years ago, and for his efforts, he got the famous actor Amir Khan to sue him for criminal defamation. That case is now going through hoops, and I believe, I'm not very sure, but Mr. Amir Khan wants to withdraw from the case, and Mr. Vadakail say, nahi, chalne do. So yes, what you're saying is possibly correct, and maybe it's not right to discuss what the honorable courts are doing right now, but yes, it is a fact. See, the other thing that we have to remember is that at one time, the oil economies were funding things in India because they had surplus money. Now they're not really very surplus on money. So this has become a sort of self-generating system. The money comes from within and generates itself, and actually it's becoming a profit center, and for all I know, the money is going back to the Saudi Arabia, which is where the dual root of the whole economic jihad thing from the banking, which I like to keep coming back to every now and then, because that is a bigger threat, works in. Meat, food chain. It does so happen that people have woken up to this. So you have regiments in the Indian Armed Forces, for example, who are insisting on jhatka like they used to in the old days. Similarly, on ships where you and I sailed, where we used to get full carcasses at one time and not pre-chopped, cooks from the old Goan Catholic school of thought are insisting on jhatka again. Our friends from the northeast, certain communities from the south and the west coast, specifically the Konkan, are back to eating pork. There is no way you can halal a pig. He won't let you. Plus, a pig is not halal anyway.
Yes.
So, steps are being taken to take things on, head on. I mean, when I was on the training ship, we used to get pork sausages 3 times a week. And that's the day when some communities remain vegetarian. Fair enough. We're trying to get that back on ships. Back to your question of, is it funding? I don't know. Sometimes I think we as a rich country, and we're not a poor country, are now funding those guys. It's a very funny rotation of money, because the amount of money that is being derived out of halal certification, scrap trade, which I mentioned but I didn't go into deeply, that's another trade that is totally controlled by a particular community. These are generating funds all below the radar. They do not show up on GDP, they do not show up on GST, because they're pure cash. And they are going back to funding people. Remember I said Iran also had economic jihad as one of its stated objectives in 2011, though it was slightly different.
So I think you've sailed into Iranian ports and been there for some time.
I have worked in Iran. I have a lot of love and affection for the people of Iran. I learned from them how they managed to not let the colonials rule them, except for that brief period when the Americans swallowed their oil. And I've understood their culture to some extent and how it impacted us. I mean, we keep saying Mughals, but it was the Persians who were calling the shots along the Tabdi.
The Turani versus Irani was always a battle in the Mughal courts.
Yes.
And because of their superior education, the Iranis used to call the shots, even though most of the military was Turani. So that was the reality of the Mughal court.
So, I mean, getting back to economic jihad and food chain in India, and more importantly, the whole thing about external and internal security. I'll give you a small example. Pretty much every railway station in India, on the platform, you get what is called, pardon my French, vegetarian crab, usually in plastic packets or triple fried stuff.
Yes.
Right outside the station, you will get cheap meat products, Hyderabad biryani, ambadi kebab or something like that, right? A few meters away, you will see pigs rooting away and performing a very important service under Swachh Bharat. They are actually cleaning the place up.
Yes.
Right? But you don't get pork on that railway station, nor do you get it on the platforms. Why is pork so important? Before the British came, before the Mughals came, pork from the old 4 digestive part system, Indian wild boar was an important part of our diet. Please
Okay.
remember what Lord Gautam Buddha ate as his last meal. Please remember the fact that hunting wild boar was an important part of pretty much every religious, I'm sorry we call it mythology, that we have read about India. Okay?
Yeah.
That same 4 digestive part, wild boar, is now being reared in Australia to consume plastic because it can digest plastic. That plastic goes into its render, which is the outer skin.
Yes.
And the meat is very edible. So Australia has a huge plastic problem because we are not importing plastic into India anymore. We lost the wild boar like the Americans lost the bison herds because along came our friends the Mughals with the Persians and said, oh, you can't eat wild boar, so let's slaughter them. Pig sticking became a big sport. Then with the British, they ate pork till their heart's content. We started eating not so nutritious food. When I was young and when you were young, you went to a typical Indian restaurant, दाल के साथ रोटी मुफ्त होती थी. I'm
Yes.
sorry, the other way around. रोटी के साथ दाल मुफ्त
Yes,
होती थी.
yes, रोटी के
ठीक है
साथ
जी?
दाल मुफ्त होती
Yesterday
थी.
I ate outside, I had to pay 15 rupees for onion. I'm not joking, at a dhaba in Jaipur.
Yes, that used to happen. In fact, when we used to go and buy vegetables in Sabzi Mandi, a lot of things like mirchi,
Dhania,
dhania
was
and
free.
all that used to come free, no longer.
So what's happened in the last 30-40 years to our food chain is maida has become cheaper, polished rice has become cheaper, milk has become totally corrupted, poultry is antibiotics. We've destroyed our food chain. A particular community on the other side keeps a lot of healthy stuff for themselves. They eat goat, they don't eat lamb. Remember that in their own homes. Our food chain is making us weak human beings, and therefore when we talk about this seminar at Culture, I'm going to get into that also. When we talk about external security and internal security, check with our armed forces on the number of soldiers nowadays who have got diabetes as a direct result of our food chain getting spoiled. When I joined the Merchant Navy, all we were doing was importing wheat. Now, wheat was a great solution, but our grandparents were not eating wheat. They were eating coarse grains.
Yes.
Millets, bajra, ragi.
Yes.
They were eating more dal.
Yes.
They were eating more vegetables. We've taken dal out of our system by making it so expensive, and we're bringing in dun peas from Australia or Burma or wherever in the world. So our food chain, and it's not only been spoiled, but it's also been made halal now, which adds to the price, which is destroying our external and internal security without making me sound as though I'm sort of going into a tangent on the stuff. But it's all linked to the fact that the price of food goes up when you add a certification to it for no rhyme or reason. There is a resistance happening. My friends in the Chinese restaurant trades, for example, have started putting pork on the menus back again. As I mentioned, Northeastern, and I have cousins who are Angami Naga tribals. They've brought pork back mainstream. All the pork from Punjab goes to Northeast. We are great in rearing pork, but we don't eat it in the north along the Gangetic belt. But
Also, the fact that it is the more marginalized communities who always used to rear pigs, and because of this halal certification business becoming so endemic, they've probably been driven out of the chain.
That's a yes and a no answer. Along the Gangetic Hindi-speaking belt, which is also sadly the belt that accepted the Pathano ki tolis and everybody who came down the mountains, yes, pork is considered unhealthy. But go down to Coorg, go down to Konkan, go down to Tamil Nadu, go down to Northeast, pork is still a vital part of survival over there. And even in places like Bihar, where I want to tell you, wild boar nomenclature has been changed from protected animal to vermin. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay, so it has become vermin in North Karnataka and all Karnataka now, thanks to the efforts of people over there whose potato fields were getting ruined. Goa, of course, bits and pieces of Maharashtra, Haryana, where even the Nilgai has been given a new name so that people can, wallop it down. They've all been re-nomenclatured vermin, which means you can go and take a pot shot at them. In Bihar, which is a state I grew up in most villages, you're right, the pork is consumed by people living on the outskirts of the village. Okay, the guys living in the middle of the village, the rich guys, they are still drinking.
No, more than consumed, they are reared by the...
No, not reared. I'm talking about the wild boar. I'm not talking about the hybrid which we got from England, which have got a single part digestive system, which are useless in terms of sanitation. They are there too, and an interesting story on that. The wild boar with the 4-part digestive system, which is now rampant all over the country because it was given protected status, is now declared vermin. The people who eat it on the outskirts of the village are becoming healthier and taller. The guy in the inside of the village who's still drinking buffalo milk and eating paneer is becoming weaker. This is reflecting in recruitment statistics, again, to uniformed forces. The danger is,
Can you enlighten us on the statistics?
I don't have any statistics offhand because this is anecdotal from the friends of mine in the armed forces. But let us say regiments which have centers in Bihar, and by the way, Gaya now has an officers training academy, or regiments, and I don't want to name this because this is sensitive stuff. Regiments which used to recruit basis certain caste or religious formations are now widening their catchment area to people from say the same religion but slightly different castes. Sure, I can take actually a name. There is a regiment called the Mahar Regiment, which was amongst the earliest experiments in multiple.
So the Mahar
sourcing.
regiment is now one of the most widely recruiting regiments
All over the country.
all over the
I
country.
mean, my father's background was Baluch, which was the first experiment by the Britishers in having a regiment with Sikh, Hindu, and Muslim soldiers working together.
Okay.
Then he came down to Marathas, and then he went and started second paras, which was again a mixed thing. So I know a little bit about this. The Mahars, the statistics are not openly available, but if you have friends in Sagar, which is the regimental center, or the Narmada Jabalpur area, you will understand that the new recruits are not necessarily from the same classes which were known as martial classes. The same thing in Tamil Nadu with one of the oldest regiments in India, the Madras Sappers, which actually the French started, which had a great history of eating pork. Why pork becomes so important is because pork is totally haram. So it goes off the food chain in India. If it comes back into the food chain like it's coming in many parts of the country, our protein intake goes up, as I give you the example of Bihar villages. The second thing that is happening, as I mentioned, is कि जो ऊंच कोटि के लोग हैं ना किसी particular religion के, they are happily eating goat. They don't touch lamb because they consider lamb to be not so clean. The goat is coming back in places, in parts of India where there is a water shortage. You go down south, you head south of Nagpur, and suddenly you don't see any more buffaloes wallowing. I love trains along the railway lines. You see more goats, and especially those dark black Indian goats which originated from Rajasthan. Their milk, their meat has gone up in price because it is halal.
The demand has gone up.
Demand has gone up. Okay, but it is filtering down to non-halal people also, right?
Okay.
Pork prices are lower than that of the goat. However, pork doesn't give milk. So there is this little halal economics things kicking in that if we didn't have halal certification for red meat in this country, then the prices of healthy red meats would come falling down drastically. People would eat more. Thankfully, they haven't reached fish as yet. So whiskey culture is taking off in totally new states in the northeast and in Bihar. This again gets related to jihad economics, and we'll come to scrap in a bit on the subject, because all this money stays below the radar. Meat has traditionally never been a taxed item. Bakra liya, kata, serve kar diya, end of matter. Same with murga. The documentation for this started with halal. And that documentation for halal certification under what we call jihad economics has become so pervasive that the coffee I drink from a shop in Delhi, which started in 1962, owned by a nice Malayali gentleman married to a Punjabi lady, is regularly approached by people of a particular religion saying, "Is your coffee halal?" And he says, "Yeah, leni matle. My coffee is coffee. It comes from a field in Kerala or in Coorg or something like that." But they reach his shop 2 times a week to ask. And if you want to know about halal certification, check the inside of your Maggi noodles chicken packet. Outside it doesn't say halal, but the taste maker inside has got halal certified. That's how they get away without putting it on top. There are friends of mine who make confectionery in Indore. Nice Sindhi Sikhs. They have to put halal certification because customers.
You were saying something about scrap?
Scrap is another cash only trade in this country. It's a great below the line trade. Okay, scrap from the railways is now slightly controlled, but everywhere else, Fauji scrap, your little home scrap, it stays below the radar. That is one aspect of a trade which is totally controlled by one particular group. More than that, there is an inflow of empty containers from the Persian Gulf countries.
Yes.
There's a lot of scrap, especially now post-war, west of India is a war zone all the way till Gibraltar actually, if you look at it. So there's a lot of steel scrap with bits and pieces of cement or even explosives attached to it, landing up in containers in various ports in the Med and the Persian Gulf. And then those containers come on zero freight, including battery waste, including whatever you want to put inside it, including bits and pieces of cars, which are then assembled and made into SUVs, incidentally. They, for a particular community, come in freight free. Everybody else has to pay freight. So the scrap trade is also now controlled by that particular community, because their sugar daddies sitting in the countries west of India are totally subsidizing the freight of a container which otherwise would come empty, repositioning back into India. That trade in the scrap business, well, most of it is legit scrap. A good part of it is sometimes stuff that we don't want in India, be it explosives, be it dangerous chemicals, be it anything under the sun, as I
think that's a very important security issue.
And I've been involved in container trade in India. When I left the Merchant Navy, I joined American Pleasant Lines as their operations manager in Delhi, when we used to do a few thousand containers a year in and out of India from intermodal ports. Between Jaipur and Delhi alone now, we have something like 60 ICDs. If you travel by train, you'll see them along the side.
I know. I ran a few ICDs once.
There you go. The volume of trade is so high that examining containers coming in and going out is simply not feasible. As you know, there have been ships catching fire because containers have been loaded with explosives and the ships have sunk. I mean, I was on a train yesterday and the railway officers behind me were discussing schedules of container trains in decimal points of the hour, like we used to do at sea. Ki ye train 6.1 hours behind schedule chal rahi hai. I was very thrilled and amazed. Wow, a goods train typically used to run 3 days behind schedule. Here you are, 6.1 ko make up karke 5.4 pe le aayenge so that it connects with XYZ ship in the age or something or the other. So physically examining containers is not going to happen in a month of Sundays. The Americans haven't been able to do it. Rotterdam can't do it. Singapore can't do it. The solution lies in checking the banking movements. Remember, I'm fiduciary fraud. The solution lies in getting tighter on the banking movements of import and export trade. Going deeper into switch BLs, for example. How do they happen? Why do you still have switch BLs when India is on direct trade with the rest of the world? We have 16,000 TEU tonnage ships getting into the Dahej, which is right next to you. So, well, there's a lot of risk in economic jihad, and I could go on and on for hours, but...
Thank you, Mr. Malik. This is a very interesting topic, and I think we need to research more. We need to get deeper into it. I think for the first time, this is a subject which would have been talked about in some kind of a mainstream talk event, though on the sidelines. But I'm sure that this would definitely increase the awareness of our people as to what are the basic issues involved in this economic jihad, not just in the dimension of economics, but also impinging on the dimensions of security. National security at that, and we'll definitely get back to you and learn more from you. Thank you, Mr. Malik.
Thank you.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.